Welcome to The Real and the Woo. I'm your host, Laurie Stern. Join me as I invite experts and friends to discuss a range of topics from the factual and practical to the mystical and magical. Consider this your virtual happy hour filled with lively, authentic, and meaningful conversations meant to inform, inspire, and ignite your curiosity. Whether you are very real or super woo, this podcast is just for you. Welcome to The Real and the Woo. I'm your host, Laurie Stern, and I'm with the gorgeous, beautiful Chicago native, now Californian, Alex Sabbag.
Hi.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you in person.
Yeah, you as well. It's awesome to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, a little jealous that we're, full on in the thick of snow, although it's warmer today and you're out there in the beautiful weather. Just a little bit about Alex. She has written a memoir called Soul Dive. And we connect on so many things, one of which is the journey of yoga. And I know that your memoir comprises a lot of things. And just to let listeners know, her book begins on her 33rd birthday, pretty much, with what she describes as a 2x4 moment in her life. And I love that phrase. And we'll get into what the moment was. But the moment inspired more of who you are now. And so I'd like to have you describe, maybe starting back from Chicago, because I'm fascinated that you were a boss-ass babe at a young age. And that's really great. So I'd just like you to talk about maybe just your journey here first. And I know you came on the mat sort of reluctantly through the back door of marathon running. And we can connect on that too. I find a lot of students come to the mat either because they're in rehab from something else, or they need to stretch, or they don't come at all because they've got really tight hamstrings for running or tight hip flexors for running. And they're like, I can't do yoga. I'm like, just come anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I set up a lot for you. Yep. So just pick a place and just let's go.
Cool. All great books start in the beginning, right? So I feel like even though I'm from Iowa, that Chicago really raised me. I moved there when I was 18 for college and then really never left. I did some brief stints in New York City and Washington, D.C., but Chicago always was and always will be home, even though I've kind of relocated to the West Coast. But I started my first business when I was 25. So I was a boss-ass baby bitch. And I owned a boutique PR company that did fundraising and media relations consulting for nonprofits. So for me, my work and my personal life have always had a very thin veil. And I think that's mostly because I like to approach everything just from this place of authenticity. Like if I don't like it, I can't fake it. And I certainly can't make you like it. Like that skill just never, that's just not in my skill set. So I began this entrepreneurial journey and was like many women were, this is a while ago. I'm 39 now. So you do the math, but this was, kind of back when we were told we can occupy space and we can show up and we can be big and strong. And it's like, I had to say what I needed to say louder and pound my fist against the table. I didn't understand, nor was the dialogue there for this softness in strength, which is something that we really embody when we practice yoga. There's a lot of like fierce power that comes through that movement when we, kind of take a series of postures on the mat, but it's quite soft and it's very gentle, even though there's a lot of power behind it. And so this all came later for me. But in my early years, I was like, hear me roar. Like I am, here I am. And don't judge me because I'm tall and pretty or, and so
you are.
Thank you. But it's like, I also have something between my ears and I didn't know how to really execute that superpower of being smart, right? Which so many of us are and, haven't really found our voice yet. So yoga did a lot of things for me, kind of fast forward to the physical. I got in touch with yoga probably when I moved to Chicago. It was when I took my first yoga class and I was like, this fucking sucks. Like I'm tall. All these instructors are like 5'1" gymnasts. I can't put my foot over there. Can you ask me to do something else? And no, they couldn't. I hated it. I was very resistant. I did dabble, the things that we persist a little bit. So there was still this invitation that would pop up every now and then in my mind just to go make it to the mat. But it wasn't until, like you said, I ran the marathon when I was, I think, 29. And, after all of that, my body was like, well, this all feels terrible. the
Yeah.
hips, the knees, the hamstrings, the pounding and what it's doing to your joints. And like, not that I think all running is bad, although I'm not going to run unless you're close to me with a knife. And that's just kind of where we're at. But I chose to do the marathon for two reasons. Number one, two of my best friends were running, and we were sort of at this time in our life where we were sick of going to the bar to catch up. And I was like, well, if y'all running, I'm going to run with you. And then when I'm done, I'll just be done and you guys can continue on. And I made it to the 10-mile mark and I was like, well, shoot, I mean, I'm already halfway there. And so I grabbed a bib 2 weeks out. And, remember, I was already fundraising as a profession. If I couldn't raise $2,000 for the zoo in 2 weeks, then I should probably retire my company. So I did it. And it was one of the best days of my adult life because it showed me that I have discipline. And I think when we live these entrepreneurial journeys, those of us who do, or we have a lot of freedom and flexibility in our lives, there's sometimes that like BS meter that I call it, we have to get in touch with of like, can I actually double down when it matters? So I can do this and not get injured, and I can do this and feel healthy. And so that's great. And then I did it once and I was like, all right, cool. We can check that box. I'm disciplined. This is great. Let's go find something else. And yoga sort of made its entry, as my body was kind of crumbling, even at a young age. And I finally accepted an invitation from a neighbor to go to the local yoga studio. And once again, I hated it. And I hated it the next time. And then I tolerated it. And then I tolerated it for probably a year. And it takes a long time to really love the practice that shows up dramatically differently day to day, hour by hour. There are no two ways to arrive, as you know. And for those who don't practice, if your hamstrings are tight, bend your knees. There's
Exactly.
people, hi, and me now, who's a yoga teacher that can help you do that or have you do something else. There's it's not a one size fits all physical experience. But personally, as my life progressed, I was in a relationship at 32 and it went very fast and furious. And we knew right away, this was it. We're going to get married. I mean, 2 weeks in, he's asking me what kind of diamonds I like. And I'm like, I don't know what those shapes are called. And so I just said big ones.
Yeah.
And
Did he do yoga? It's funny. I got married very young, and by standards now I was 23. And, I went with my husband to get my ring, and he gave me a choice between the smaller diamond, which is better quality, or the larger diamond, which, was pretty flawless to me. But sometimes when I'm aggravated with him, I'm like, I should have gone for the bigger diamond. But I went for the smaller one with better quality. But I've made up for it in a variety of ways. Got 4 kids, they're all my diamonds. But it's just that moment where I didn't want to feel greedy and, whatever. So it's funny. So I like that you said that, big ones. Did he practice yoga when you guys were together?
He was a meditator. And so he was the first person that I ever really knew, least of all was very intimately close with, that had a really solid meditation practice. And for me at that time when we met, I was like, okay, good for you. But it was a little much for me. I was like, that's a little, it's a little weird. And I don't like to use that word when talking about any practices that are actually very healthy for you. But that was
it was foreign.
It was foreign. And when things are foreign, there's this layer of fear almost.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it. And he would go on these 10-day silent retreats. And I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And the beauty of it made its way into my life. And now looking back, wow, what a man that really walked the talk in that practice. That's a really beautiful thing to witness. And at the time, unfortunately, we just didn't get the gift of time for me to really learn from him in the way that I learned from him in plenty of other ways, which we get to. But from that respect, we were kind of going like this as far as, our practices. Yeah. But on my 33rd birthday, we had been together for roughly 9 months. He was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. So that's one of many 2x4 moments in my life. And by the way, for good or bad, you will have many in your life too, as will everybody listening. We're not absolved, it's not a one and done deal like the marathon was for me. But the day before I was flying home from Spain and he was at the office and he wasn't well. His head hurt, was missing, he was in finance and he was reporting numbers in the thousands that probably should have been in the hundreds of millions. And so his coworker, the ER, and I was flying home from Barcelona and I was like, well, I'll go straight there. And he's like, well, it's just wait it out, And after a few hours, he's like, well, they're going to give me a migraine cocktail. They said, everything's fine. And so he came home. And so we had this night together and there was all this anticipation or assumption that he was going to propose on my birthday. And So we woke up the next morning and I was jet lagged. So I'm up at like 6 a.m. I'm like, let's go. And we go to Soho House and we drink frosé and cappuccino on the roof. And we're going to do the farmer's market. And said my parents were on their way into town. We just had this whole day planned. I'm big into birthdays.
Me
And
too.
as we were sitting on the roof, the ER department of Northwestern Memorial called and said, you have to come back for an emergency brain MRI. And so he takes the call and looks at me and tells me, and I'm like, oh, like right now. And he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like right now. And so when we went back to the hospital, it's kind of one of those things where you just don't leave until they're done with you. You know, you're kind of held hostage there until they know what's up. And so we got him all, checked in and settled the next day, which was my birthday. He proposed on the 10th floor of the hospital, which is not the maternity ward floor. That's just not where you be. And of course I accepted, but with it, I had already accepted this role of being his caregiver. Now I'm accepting this role of being his fiance or his wife. And, with it just came a whole host of other things I didn't realize I was saying yes to in that process, which was completely losing myself.
Right.
And there is no rule book. I had no, whatever tools I had were up on some high shelf collecting dust. Those weren't implemented. And that's what happens when we hit fight or flight. You either run or you double down. And I can tell you right now, I am a fighter.
Right.
I am
So I want to get to that because we're going to probably bounce a little back and forth So I think one of the things I read is you were a competitive horseback rider as well.
I was as a child.
So it's interesting because you said, that the marathon that you found you had the discipline. And I was surprised to just hear you say that because you had discipline before, demonstrated by what you did with the horses, demonstrated by getting through college and starting a business. And so I find it interesting that of all the things that you had already displayed this discipline part of yourself, and it happens to everybody, like, oh, that's nothing. Oh, that's just the horses. Oh, that's just growing a business. Oh, whatever. But it was the marathon for whatever reason. And maybe you look a little surprised while I'm asking you, did you think about negate the other things, or you just took those things for granted because they came so easily to you? And this was the first time you actually were out of your comfort zone, maybe? So it counted more? Does that make sense?
I think you're reading my facial expression because I think one of the beauties of these conversations is people pick up things about your journey that you never even noticed. And that's one of them. I've never, ever been asked that. Yeah. Pat yourself on the back, girl. That's amazing. I think what it was is I was out from the home, I was living independently. I had a little bit of cash. I could party whenever I wanted. And I was very social.
I've heard you talk about the book that you'll write of, Alex's, missives from the bar. My daughter just texted in the family chat, I told her Amanda, you got to write a book about missives from the Uber because her Uber drivers ask her the craziest questions and make the most ridiculous statements. But I interrupted you. Go right ahead.
Yeah. And I think it was like I made a choice to do it. And then I had to learn how to do it in a way that I wouldn't hate it. I've always hated exercise. I mean, to this day, if you were like, go run the mile, I would be like, oh, I think my asthma came back, whatever. I always hated that, but I always wanted to look a certain way. So, here we are. And so I think it was because I had to double down on not only the endurance with the running, but the diet and the recovery and the sleep and my lifestyle had to change to accommodate this goal that I was trying to achieve. And, when I was younger and rode horses, it's kind of all I knew. I had supportive parents. I had a mom who would pick me up and drop me off. And nothing was ever really up to me to do on my own. The business is a good point. I totally had discipline and a lot of grit, with that business and the yoga studio. But yeah, I don't know. There's something about the physicality of the marathon, whereas I've never seen myself as athletic, like I was on the C team of basketball, and that shocks people because I'm tall. And tall doesn't mean you're coordinated or know what to the ball,
Right.
It just was such a major physical accomplishment for me that nobody thought I was going to do. I mean, my own parents were like, there's no way she's going to run that. We don't have to worry about it.
No, so I get it. I just wanted to echo back to you, just maybe reframing how tenacious you always clearly have been. And one of the things I wanted to hop onto is, the yoga studio that came into your life. You had mentioned your intuitive, the sort of like the serendipitous way it fell in your lap. But I wanted to sort of touch on intuition. So for me, yoga, and I'd love to talk about this with you, it was the gateway drug to so much more, right? And people talk a lot about spiritual awakenings. Like you said, the 2x4 moments in our lives, I can identify the times. I call those, like the ADD, VDD kind of thing, like before my dad died, after my dad died, before this happened, after this happened, and where we are along the way. And so for me, in terms of spirituality, it was before I went through yoga teacher training and during it, and then everything that came after, because I was always an athlete and a dancer. And until I walked onto the mat, I taught aerobics. I was like step aerobics, triple step, double step. I was a runner too. And until I got to yoga, I had forgotten about the dancer part of me. And that was the first thing that really married the athleticism and the lyricism of dance. So it really spoke to me, but it takes discipline too. And, so along the way from your yoga journey, did you notice like the buy one, get one free of spirituality that helped you navigate when you were going to stop your job, or maybe it was before then, and then how to open up this yoga studio and run it?
Well, yoga taught me a lot. I mean, yoga was, began as a physical exercise for me, as it does for so many. And then when I became a caregiver, that's when yoga really shifted. I say the higher power struck during those moments because I didn't have the physical ability to do the powerful stuff. I was a shell of a human, but I kept showing up, and there was something really profound happening in that process where I was starting to learn how to choose myself in a really healthy way, not just like, I'm going to treat myself with a glass of wine, I mean, nothing wrong with that, but like, it was a different choice as I was like, and I was starting to embody it. Like, I think we can know it, but when we start to put it into practice and then make it routine and really embody that choice, it gets into our tissues, right? And we never go back. That's like where it becomes a really like inherent behavior versus just something we want to try to do. As far as intuition goes, I've always had it, and I've known a little. And then the older I've gotten, it's just become more clear that if I can condition this superpower, it's going to be really helpful for me. And yoga, this is going to sound so basic, but really helps you get quiet upstairs so you can actually hear what's going on. So that when your intuition does speak, and when you get the little tap on the shoulder or a little nudge in a different direction, you're quiet enough to hear it. Because I believe everybody has this. I think women may have it a little bit more than men, but I do think it's in every single body. But I think it's up to us to keep the noise away or at bay so that we can actually hear and feel it when it comes through, because that's where I think we get a little crosswise. As far as how it took me, from Chicago PR company to California and sort of everything in between, it became very clear I needed to be somewhere else geographically. There was just too much had happened for me in Chicago, and I got to the point where there wasn't any more growth. I did it. I ran the company. I owned a great condo. I was in the best neighborhood. I could do all the things. I was a text message away from anything I wanted. And I didn't see a path to growth at that moment. I also wasn't well, all these things that happened. It took me a really long time to sort of bounce back and get to the other side of the traumatic event of living through his diagnosis and like that journey, kind of alongside of, and then even with some distance. So I knew I needed to be in California. I didn't exactly know why. It took me a couple of years after being out here where I just finally was like, I am exhausted from pushing. And I think back to my, kind of how I opened as this boss bitch, everything was, I drove it. And I'm not saying that stuff didn't need to be there. It wasn't purposeful as it showed up. But I was pushing everything. I wanted the end result of you name it, and I could get there because darn it, I'm a hard worker and I'm smart and I know who to call and I can make it happen. And I think in some respects, that's okay. That's a gift, but that's not leaving any room for allowing. You're not in surrender at all, and you're constantly in force. And I finally gave up because I was tired. And I was like, you know what? I just put my hands in the air and I was like, I can't do it anymore. Whatever's going to show up is going to show up. And, sort of the intricate web of opportunity and loss that sort of followed that very conscious decision to let go led me to having Soul Dive Yoga. I was the chief marketing officer of an insurance technology company, had just bought this place that I'm sitting in right here, committed everything I owned to renovating it. I'm right on the bluff in Solana Beach. It's beautiful. A month later, I get fired. And the very day I get fired, I have the lease dropped in my inbox to what is now Soul Dive Yoga. Someone's like, you should just look at this. I don't want a yoga studio. I don't want to be poor. I don't want this. Nobody wants this. I don't know if you've seen that show on Netflix, but like, I was like, really? And in the desert, that's 2.5 hours away from where I live. And, in hindsight of it all, it was very purposeful. It built the foundation for what is now a much larger brand. Soul Dive has this one brick and mortar store, but it really paved the way for me to write my book.
Yeah.
And now, I do live at the beach and I go back every now and then, but you just have to trust that even something that's good in your life, if it's on its way out, let it go, because you really need the space for something that's better. And that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
It is, especially if we're high functioning, like you said, pushers in our lives. I'm just looking at some of my notes here for you because there's so many wonderful things that you have said. I've listened to some of the things that you've been on, read some excerpts from your book, of course. And one of the things I love hearing you talk is the way you transfer the macro we to I. And I don't know if that's part of your training overall or the yoga training, but what I'm meant to do and what I do is personalize through my experiences, ways that people connect to those experiences for themselves. So I love that when you catch yourself, because I've heard you do it, those people, or sometimes it's like, no, I. And so I really appreciate that about you. And I don't know if you recognize that in yourself, but I do.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to kind of know your lane. And for me, I have all the letters, the PhD, the MD, the blah, 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 the whole alphabet in life, period. I didn't go to business school. I don't have the literary and academic credentials. I have the life school credentials. I can speak from my own life experience. I'm the expert there. And my role is not to tell you what to do or how to live your life. My goal really is to light you up in a way that you feel empowered to do something extra, whatever it is you do. And I call it the practice. And I'm very detailed about what I do for myself. And hey, you can carbon copy mine. I mean, I stand behind it. I think it works really well. But, it's if I can say something that's inspiring to people just to get them off the bench and back into the ring, then I've done my job. But who am I to tell you, what works for you or what you should be doing? People who tell you really should do that, I'm like, I stop listening.
My students know, we don't should on ourselves. That's an old Jack Canfield thing from self-esteem seminar days back in California. Actually, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned your superpower. I feel like you kind of answered it, which is your intuition. Would you say there's another superpower that you can describe about yourself?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about communication and connection. I am a connector, I'll meet somebody and then 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh, you guys have to meet. Here's just a text, you take it from here. And I do that all the time. And I think that's really powerful. You never know what's going to happen on the other side of that 30-minute coffee meeting. And we have to kind of be open to things sliding into our lives in ways we never could have anticipated or even asked for. So I kind of do my little role in, bringing people together, macro and micro, right? So, creating this community that is, Soul Dive in Palm Desert is really beautiful. There's a lot of connection and there's a big brand extension that I'm releasing this week, just about that space and what it means to come together in union, right? If yoga really break it down, it's to yoke and to be in union. We don't have to just do that through Warrior One and Warrior Two. We can do that through art installations and wine tastings and whatever, just to gather. I define Soul Dive as this moment of time where you drop out of the ring of your life and you drop into your body. And it's a reprieve. It's a break to just be with no expectation and no judgment, to show up exactly how you are in any way, shape, or form and simply be. And I think one of my superpowers is really bringing that permission slip forward and allowing people who are in the room with me in whatever capacity, whether through podcast or practice or somewhere in between, to really hear that invitation and apply it. To really feel like I can come in this room and just lay on my mat for an hour, or I can come here and do 800 chaturangas, and it doesn't matter either way because I'm taking exactly what I need from the experience, and it's making me, a better person. I have more peace, I have more ease, whatever it is on the backside. So yeah, I think there's a couple superpowers. Yeah, I have a couple, and then the useless superpower, girl. I find the best parking spot in the hospital garage.
Yeah.
Specifically. Can do it at Bloomingdale's, but man, you give me a hospital and I am right by the door every single time.
That's hilarious. So it's so funny that you just said parking spot because when you were talking about running and, all this stuff, I'm like, the antithesis of or the oxymoron is as active as I am. I hate parking far away from where I'm supposed to be. I'll run for miles, whatever. I'll exercise for days, but I want the closest parking spot. And in my family, one of my grandmothers on the other side, her name is Mimi. And every time we get those first spots, we're like, thank you, Mimi. Like Mimi's our parking fairy. So I love that you said that. The whole reason I have a podcast and a website, and I say this, I think in my intro on my podcast, is to connect dots, whether I have skin in the game or not. So I just love how we're aligned in that way. And I'd like to think it's because of at least the way it sounds like we connect in how we teach yoga. I don't care if you come lay down for an hour or like you said, do 150 chaturangas. You're coming to get the experience that your body needs in that moment. And, try not to compare to where you were before. So I love that. The name of your book really inspired me to ask, because the image came to mind, doing a dive, doing a deep dive is a beautiful thing. It's an intentional thing. Yet the way your soul took a dive was out of your control. Is that maybe part of how you came up with the title, or is that all new to you that I just said that?
No, the soul dive really it's the time period. And I think for me, it was kind of a year and a half post-diagnosis where I was like, who am I? What am I doing in this world? Like, what's my purpose? And I really took myself out of the ring of life and dropped into these like introspective practices, just learning. And
so the deep dive.
And then the into the deep, my journey into the deep is a biblical reference. And I mean it as such, but I also mean it as like, I am not a human who plays in the shallow. I can't talk about the weather. It's not for me. It's like, if I walk into a room and people are just like small talking, I'm like, oh shoot, I left something in my car. It takes a piece of my soul. When I meet somebody and we start a dialogue, and it's like aligned, all of a sudden we are like, boom, we're somewhere that mattered. And it could be 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be hours, like if you're really willing to go there. And I think that shows like when people are able to do that, you got some walls down, you're very open-hearted, you've got like, you're intentional. And I do really love that word. So I sort of have redefined soul dive now. Like I don't recommend anybody follow my path and go, get out of the ring of life for 5 years. I mean, shoot, my life down to the ground over a really long period of time, but it was because I couldn't let go. Because I was unwilling to loosen the grip on the things that I thought I had to have. And so there's an entire, kind of lesson to be learned now, but it's like you could take a 10 breath break in your day and you just did a soul dive. So I'm now kind of flipping it and creating this like verb, around the two words that, allow people to go do this in many, many different ways, shapes, and forms. And again, I don't care if you ever roll out a yoga mat. I think yoga's great. You think yoga's great. People listening to this probably think yoga's great, but many people don't. So do something else, figure out what it is that you're getting out of your head and you're into your body.
Right.
Like things can slow down.
And that's, what comes up in terms of, I talk about this a lot also. There's many forms of yoga. There's many forms of meditation. You don't have to go on a 10-day silent retreat. You can go on a bike ride. I know you mentioned in your book, the moment where you had your dog. Is your dog still with us?
He's not.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. You just talked about your doggy. Oh, it must have been really soon.
The worst.
Recent. I'm so sorry. But you talked about, here you were with this dog that wasn't doing well and your fiance wasn't doing well. And you just like had a good cry and a glass of wine. And it was like a low moment for you that you realized was a low moment. And you were able to pick yourself up out of that and say, I recognize I'm having this moment, and now what? And so the resilience that built, from that experience is so universal. Whether it's your situation, like you just said, you don't recommend necessarily people follow the path. It wasn't the path that you chose anyway. And we're going to get to that part of your path. So I'm so sorry about your doggy. And that's one of the hardest things that we have to go through besides the other hard things that we go through. And, the dichotomy between losing a human and losing a pet, people that don't have pets don't understand.
No.
How deep that goes. It goes deep.
It does go deep. I would say that moment, I just, I had a byline story published this week in a publication called Fearless. And it's called
I saw that.
okay, it's starting over as a soulful act of bravery. And I open it up with that moment. And the moment's hard to read. I mean, it's cringy and it's like, whoa, I'm sitting back behind my building, the dog's hobbling, my fiance's dying, and I'd made a margarita at the neighbor's house. And it's a funny story why I made the margarita at the neighbor's house, because I had ordered imperfect produce, which is like just the ugly fruit and veggies.
I love this story.
I'd taken over the account that my fiance had been running, and I thought I was ordering pieces, but I was actually ordering pounds. And so like 30 boxes of produce shows up at my house. So I'm like juicing all the blood oranges and we're making tarts and whatever, none of it went to waste, but my goodness, read the fine print, people. And the most beautiful part about that moment was that I did have this glimmer of awareness that I hit the bottom. I don't think losing a parent would have been as hard as knowing that I had a can of gasoline in one hand and a match in the other. And I was about to watch my own life burn to the ground. I hadn't even started yet. Also, spoiler alert, I am publishing a course on resilience. And I think like it took me writing the book, doing the book tour, connecting with people to understand like, well, if I really wrapped a bow around this, what would it be called? And it really is resilient. And we're born with some resilience, right? We're born into the Super Bowl with no pads and we're told to survive. That is the human experience. Okay. But as we go, sometimes we're resilient and sometimes we're just like straight in survival. And we don't really have a process to follow that we can practice and then call it resilience. So that again, that, those habits can really get into our tissues. So that's coming from me. But yeah, it didn't make it easier, but I was aware and I was honest. And I think we can really stop bullshitting ourselves. Like it's fine, which I did for months, told everybody it was fine, pushed away all the help and support I couldn't receive. I didn't think I was worthy. I also thought I could like play God and fix it. And we all know how that is, right? So yeah.
God, so where I go with all you're saying too, and I love that you've got a program coming up and we're going to get to the business part of it and then we're going to go to the other parts. I believe, like you said, we come into the Super Bowl with no pads. My tagline is, if you know how your wheels turn, which are your chakras, then you can drive your vehicle anywhere. So for me, the workshops I do we do come with instructions and they're the chakra system to me. And so in those moments where you felt powerless or defined by what was happening in your life, my teaching and my goal is to elevate the consciousness that we are more in control if we understand how we're made and how we have blind spots. Where do they come from? The limiting beliefs and on. It doesn't mean bad shit won't happen. It means while the bad shit's happening, you don't lose your shit or your sense of self. Of course, we know the pendulum swings and you're going to be high and you're going to be low, but how to get back to that center, which is what the practice teaches us, is important. What I meant when I saw that you had an article coming out, I didn't read the article. I was more taken with the sizzle reel. And I'm in this place right now. I'm super jealous about it because I'm supposed to be speaking to, and there's these things called sizzle reels. I'd never even heard the term until I got on this other thing. And it's a beautiful production. So very well done. And we can talk offline about that unless you want to plug the guy. But wow, I've got sizzle reel envy right now.
Thank you. I mean, you just need a place to start, and you have tons of content. You have a podcast. I think everybody these days, you have a platform. You have access to a platform, whether you're taking advantage of it or not, and you don't have to overthink it. Those were all clips from podcasts, photo shoots. None of it's actually me speaking on stage, which is something that I'm a little insecure about, but that will come. Like we'll do a next iteration and a next iteration. So, for something that was kind of cobbled together with cutting room floor pieces, I'm glad you like it. But
it's beautiful. It's brilliant. You're beautiful. You're brilliant. And now it's time for Joy on the Fives. So, Alex, I gave you some homework and I asked you to set an alarm before we got together. And I'd like you to share what happened when yours went off.
So I reflected on a moment that happened last night. So I knew it was coming and I knew I was going to have to pick a joy moment, but at times we can't pick it until the thing happens. And this really beautiful thing happened. Very simple. I was out to dinner with a friend. We went from dinner to a wine bar. We're hanging out. This other friend texts, okay, I'm done with my date. And I said, great. And I just said where we were. I didn't invite her to come, nothing. She was like kind of 2 small towns away. And I left it. literally 15 minutes later, she comes bursting through the door and was like, so glad you're still here. And it seems like such a simple thing. And in Chicago, it was easy because everyone's in the same neighborhood and you just walk 2 blocks and then poof, there you are. What was so beautiful about this is like, I was in Chicago for 18 years and I moved to California. I've been here 4.5 years. It is now like this space and time where I finally feel like I have a solid sense of community. And it was such a simple thing last night for her to come bursting through the door that like, it filled me. And so I like stayed for one more glass, which I wasn't going to do. And it was a beautiful little moment. And it's just very cool things. And I think if there's one thing I can impart is we all have people that we love a lot and we do want to make their day. And sometimes we don't know how. We really don't need to overthink it. Like a very small gesture, like popping through the door in a sparkly jacket, goes a really long way. Like it doesn't have to be this whole pomp and circumstance dog and pony show situation. Like you can show up for people in really basic ways and it makes a world of difference.
Oh, I love that. All right. Well, thank you for sharing. And then we're going to finish on your business. So I know you've got a retreat coming up and that's been something that you're manifesting as well. And I just didn't know if there's anything else about growing a business, running a business. The fires, did they impact your business at all? I don't recall if your house where you are now is in that area or the studio.
I'm not in either way. So
okay,
I live
good.
2.5 hours north of San Diego and the Palm Desert is 2.5 hours inland. So I have encountered a lot of people who've been displaced from the fires, and the studio sort of set up a program to support their yoga practice as need be, through that time. But no, I was not personally impacted. The studio is just over 2 years old. So she's doing great. The brand extension I'm announcing is just getting away from yoga being the only thing we do within those walls and making it known publicly. Like we know, I've had, some little things happen here and there, but they've been on a very small scale and we haven't screamed it from the rooftops. But right now we have this beautiful art installation called Moving Meditations, which is created by a local artist who was a dancer and found yoga as she got a little older and still wanted that like really watery fluid movement, but like couldn't really do the dance that she used to. Turns out she's a beautiful painter. So we have 19 of her pieces in the studio of all different shapes and sizes. She actually painted me in a really beautiful, kind of wild thing pose. And 2 Fridays ago, we had a debut party. We had a gallery party. We had wine, we had charcuterie. We were part of like El Paseo, which is downtown Palm Desert, like part of their art walk. And I always knew, I knew it, okay, the intuition and like the vision. When I saw that space for the first time, I'm like, oh, art installations, dinner parties, like this is going to be a space to gather, but it can't just come from the top down. I can't say I want, right? It has to come from the community so that they can bring it from the ground up. That's really how movements, get made. And if we know nothing else from yoga, it's like when yoga stays really community and grassroots, it just has such a powerful capacity to grow. And one of the things I'm most excited about is it's not about getting on a yoga mat. Like you need to come through the door. And that's what I say. Once you come through the door once, you're going to keep coming. Whether you're the person who's only coming for the wine and cheese, great. I see you. I love you. Or you're coming for all the yoga or both. We're really just like expanding the way that we talk about community and making it accessible, mind, body, soul, and human interest, to a lot more people.
I love that. That's such a beautiful image. And I know food is a big part of your life in terms of when you and I had our first initial call, so I don't know if you want to talk about the diet that you choose, because I don't know why it seems like you feel it's controversial, or I don't know. I get that feeling like you don't like to admit that you're a meat eater for some reason. Is that true?
Well, less now. I'll tell you, 5 years ago, when I started on this carnivore path, it wasn't widely discussed and it was widely censored. So there were just, we're in a completely different place, especially with RFK, and this health craze and the no seed oils and the getting back to like our roots of what's true health, where people are very awake to those messages now. And so I don't feel the insecurity I did a few years ago, but it shocks some people that I am, a yoga studio owner and I'm a huge meat eater. And I'm like, well, I'm from Iowa.
I mean, people are like, wait, you do yoga and you say fuck? I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, what do you, we're human. What do they expect?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I follow like a very high animal fat consumption diet. And I eat little to no sugar, but I drink tequila and wine. I rarely eat fruit. I eat a little bit of greens, some root vegetables, but for the most part, I'm consuming meat, bone broth or like a protein powder. And the company Heart and Soil needs to be paying me as an ambassador because I've gotten so many people on their organ supplements and their protein powder. And I've seen it work in my life and I've seen it work I can tell you this, I haven't seen a scenario where it hasn't worked with somebody.
Right. Yeah. And that's a path that you've chosen.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I wanted to circle back because when you were going through your marathon training and you said you had to adapt that diet, how did you feel then energetically to how you feel now energetically, if there's even a comparison?
Well, there isn't. My gut is healthy now. So, in my late 20s and early 30s, or in my 20s and early 30s, I wasn't healthy, meaning like there was always something going on, like a sinus or a head cold or a stomach issue, or like I felt like food always made me feel sick. I was eating like tons of salad and quinoa and like crap. Like just things that I thought I was, having like meatless nights all the time. I mean, pasta, like it was just, I didn't know then what I know now. So I think my energy level was probably high because I was younger, like there was like sustainable level of just being in my 20s that it's different now. But I think I look much better now. I feel much better now. My gut is healed, which calms down all kinds of issues.
Yeah.
And my overall health there's no comparison.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I know it's a personal journey to you. And, disclaimer, it's what works for you. And people are welcome to go find what works for them as well.
Yeah, totally.
Thank you so much for spending all this time with me today. And I know our conversation is not over, but before I let you go, I want to know if there's any other thing you want to wrap up for my listeners in terms of how to find you, how to find your book, ways they can work with you, and anything like that.
Sure. You can find me on Instagram at Alex Sabbag. My website is soulfulalchemist.com. And you can find Soul Dive Yoga online and on Instagram as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. And we will be back again for another segment very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.